Last fall, a murder-suicide in the small town of Menahga, Minnesota shocked the community. Folks wondered why a grieving old man would kill his financial planner and then shoot himself. Investigators later found that the elderly man's will was written to leave his entire estate to that financial planner, Mike Callahan. But is that what the elderly man really wanted? The Fox 9 investigators have discovered the financial planner was being paid from the estates of other clients after they died as well. Trish Van Pilsum continues our investigation. Tonight, the family of one of Mike Callahan's clients questions the financial planner's motives and the motives of an associate and friend who is still very much alive.
Which doctor?
Dr. Erickson.
Oh, you know Dr. Erickson?
He's my very best friend.
Your best friend?
Yes, he certainly is.
This is a story about boundaries
I do not think it's appropriate.
and trust
My dad and Betty trust Vern Erickson implicitly.
and how fragile trust can be when those boundaries get blurred,
I think when it's all said and done, they need to make a movie out of it.
which would begin with a love story.
Betty, she's my step-mother. She was married to my dad quite a few years there.
Betty and Jim Roberts didn't always have a lot of money, but they had each other and a farm they loved in Cass County.
My dad lived on that property for 30-some years.
But at some point, Jim inherited from his mother. Friends say it was millions and that he loved to play the stock market. He told a friend and fellow trader he made $3 million at one point. But it was the land that mattered.
It's sitting on a private lake. It's a large number of acres.
Jim talked of leaving it to the Mayo Clinic where he'd gotten care.
My dad really wanted to leave a legacy.
But here's where the plot takes a turn. At some point, the Roberts asked Mike Callahan, an insurance agent turned financial planner who would be murdered by a client, to help them with their finances. And here's where the boundaries come in. Longtime family doctor Vern Erickson was named Betty's power of attorney along with Callahan.
He and I are the trustees for the estate to handle everything.
You're listening to the voice of Mike Callahan just 4 months before he was murdered. He's talking to police after a theft he discovered at Betty Roberts. He was not a suspect, but what's interesting is he's saying he's responsible for Betty's finances. He and
Dr. Erickson, who is my doctor and a personal friend, is also Jim and Betty's doctor.
I would be extremely concerned.
Arthur Kaplan is a nationally known medical ethicist.
I would worry, is this patient really trying to use the doctor both to guide their healthcare and to guide their financial world? And why merge the two?
Lawyers and doctors can have friends.
Brad Person is the lawyer who wrote the power of attorney agreement between Erickson and Jim and Betty Roberts.
It's a close personal relationship, and that's the reason for the conservatorship or the power of attorney, not the fact that it's it's her doctor. I don't see what's wrong with that.
Boundaries between Betty Roberts and Dr. Erickson have always been fluid.
So he's kind of the one that's helping take care of me right now because I'm trying to get everything settled, you know.
If you ask Betty Roberts' family and friends when they started to worry about the arrangement with her folks and Callahan and Dr. Erickson, they'd say after Betty's husband died in the spring of 2016. More on that in a minute. And they'd point to these vulnerable adult reports they filed on Betty's behalf in the spring of 2017. 9 months later, Mike Callahan was dead. And that's when Betty's family really got worried.
I'm desperately concerned.
Because it was a client, Carl Albin, who killed Callahan in Albin's own house. Police searched Mike Callahan's house looking for an explanation for the unexplainable. Albin also shot himself. They found a will showing that Callahan had complete control of Albin's estate. Albin's family filed a court claim saying he may have taken some of Carl's assets through fraud, illegal activity, and duress.
They had a lot of money.
When police searched Callahan's house, they of course seized all the documents related to Carl Albin's estate, but they also found and took Betty Roberts' checkbook. In fact, the application the police wrote for the search warrant is clear. They're interested in Dr. Erickson's links to Callahan in addition to Callahan himself. The application ties Callahan to Erickson, saying they both work with elderly folk And it lists serious concerns reported by family and friends about the relationship between both men and Betty Roberts. First, that as power of attorney, they had a lot of authority over Betty. In fact, the Fox 9 investigators found this power of attorney form at the Hubbard County Courthouse. Betty signed it in September 2015. Her family knew Betty and Jim had made Callahan and Dr. Erickson power of attorney, but
No, I've never seen it.
didn't know that in the event of her husband's death, Callahan and Dr. Erickson would control everything from Betty's property transactions to beneficiary transactions, business and banking transactions. It also lets them give themselves gifts without accounting for them.
Wow, that is shocking. That is very shocking.
These things aren't unusual for people named power of attorney, but Betty's family says it's not the role for a doctor.
It's very concerning.
The medical ethicist agrees.
I think physicians and nurses, by the way, too, are setting themselves up for big trouble if they accept this role of financial decision maker.
8 months after signing the forms, Betty's husband was dead, and sure enough, family concerns about Dr. Erickson's treatment pop up in that search warrant application.
He had some heart issues. He had a doctor that wanted to take him off of his heart medication.
Dr. Erickson had told Jim Roberts the medicine wasn't safe to take over a long period of time.
He just wasn't sure about that. I asked him to please talk to the cardiologist. And then my next conversation with him, he told me he was off of them, he was doing great, he just needed to eat healthier and, live a little healthier. And I still wanted him to see the cardiologist. So then I was very surprised less than 2 weeks later to get a call from our neighbor that my dad had died of a massive heart attack.
Betty?
She was devastated. Devastated.
The search warrant application, repeating family reports, reads this way. Betty Roberts' care is of much concern, especially after James Roberts died shortly after Dr. Erickson took him off cardiac medications prescribed for him by Dr. Chris Anderson, Sanford Health Bemidji, upon referral from the Mayo Clinic.
Is that true?
He was cremated immediately.
So we don't have any idea whether a medication change caused or even contributed to Jim Roberts' death. We don't have his medical records to confirm the claims in the warrant. The thing about boundaries is they protect everybody, especially the doctor.
Don't mingle the two roles.
8 months after her dad died, Aaron Roberts reported Callahan and Dr. Erickson to adult protection. Betty was staying at Callahan's house instead of a nursing home, recovering from surgery. The report says that Betty was being manipulated and isolated.
Isolation is the first step to abuse.
A social worker talked to Betty and decided she was competent and not in need of services. In other words, not vulnerable. According to these letters to Betty's stepdaughter, a second complaint is still under investigation in both Cass and Wadena counties.
My name is Sarah Wabenace, and I live across the road from Betty Roberts.
Sarah says Betty didn't like going to Callahan's house. She most often didn't get to sleep in a bed.
I said, Betty, is it your wish to stay there? And she said, no, but I don't have no choice.
After one visit to Callahan's,
she was crying. She was just shaky,
It took Betty a while.
I'm going to tell you something, not tonight, because it's going to piss the hell out of you.
To say what had upset her.
Is the will thing bothering you?
Yeah.
You're watching a video recording a different neighbor made of a conversation with Betty. He's known Betty for years and is a former police investigator.
I'm too nervous today.
Later, Betty tells her neighbor that Callahan had taken her to a lawyer to see about changing their trust to include Dr. Erickson as beneficiary. The Fox 9 investigators tracked down that lawyer. He said Betty seemed vulnerable, that a red flag went up for him. Betty never came back. Betty describes what Callahan did at his home about a week after that meeting.
He says, now, have you decided what you're going to do? Are you going to give the ground, maybe that ain't exactly the words, but I think it is, to Dr. Erickson? Are you going to give it to Mayos? I said, I don't know what you're talking about.
Betty has given these same details to several friends and family. Callahan tried to get her to sign several pages of documents.
And then he puts this in front of me early in the morning, like 7 o'clock in the morning. Meaning he wanted me to rush into it that morning. He was all ready with the pencil and everything. You'd think I was maybe going to die that night or something.
She said she hadn't actually read the documents.
There ain't people going to rush me into things. I'm a slow mover.
What did you think when Mike Callahan was shot?
I was relieved. I hate to say this, I was relieved for Betty's sake.
But did Dr. Erickson, who was now in charge and who, after all, stood to benefit, know about any of this?
Coming up after the break.
Did you know that Mike Callahan was pressuring Betty Roberts to leave you property?